Hello. Hello, everyone. Uh, Representative Frost, it's a pleasure to have you on the Politico stage today.
Yeah, it's so good to be here.
Most of the conversations this week are focused on the current state of the Democratic Party, but we wanted to carve out some time to focus on the future of the party and delve deeper into where young Democrats want the party to go in the years ahead. So who better to talk to than the first member of Gen Z to be elected to Congress, Representative Frost. Thank you again, but let's get started.
Yeah.
President Biden spoke to the delegates last night. What was the mood in the room from where you were situated?
So I was sitting with the Florida delegation, the best state in the country, and the energy was very high. I mean, people were really excited to hear from the president, to hear him talk about his agenda. He's one of the most effective presidents in the history of our country, and the most progressive president in the history of our country too, which I think speaks to a lot of young Americans. I was actually specifically sitting in a row that had a lot of young Latinos in it, that are young delegates from Central Florida and areas of South Florida as well, and they were hyping him up, and they were really excited. And so there was just a lot of great energy in the room. And I'm a big Joe Biden fan. From the day he called me when I first won my race, and we talked about the similarities. How when he was elected to the Senate, he was 29, and I was elected to the House of Representatives at 25. And we spoke about his experiences going through that, to when he took my bill to make an Office of Gun Violence Prevention and use it as the framework for now the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And so I'm a big Joe Biden fan, and that was a great speech.
How would you sum up his legacy at this point in time? And do you think young voters care about that legacy? Or are they sort of happy to see a sort of changing of the guard?
I think what we see in Joe Biden, especially during this presidency, is he's been effective, but I believe a huge reason why he's been able to be so effective is because of his experience. Who would have known that as a 29-year-old senator who had to wait a few weeks to be able to be sworn in because he was so young, would one day be president of the United States and use all those relationships and experiences he learned along the way, and personal tragedy that for a lot of people, you would go through that and not be able to continue that public service, but he did. And because of it, he got us out of that COVID pandemic crisis we were in, helped us bring our economy back, helped people go back to schools, go back to work, come back to real life, dedicate the most money that not just this country, but out of the entire world has ever dedicated towards the climate crisis. And so I think Gen Z does care about his legacy, and I think history will look back on this moment and say he's one of the greatest presidents our country's ever had because of what he did during his presidency, but also because, and he said it last night, he loves the job, but he loves democracy in this country even more, and that's why he's passed that baton.
So in the past few weeks, the picture of unity across all corners of the party has been on full display. Mm-hmm. But there are divisions, such as surrounding the war in Gaza. Obviously, a lot happened surrounding that with the protests yesterday. There were some references in the speeches last night to it. But those divisions are very real. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people who seemed most upset with the administration on the subject seem to be young voters, or potential voters, I should say. Do you see that issue as potentially a liability for the Democrats heading into November in terms of turnout for young voters for the party?
I think what the vice president said and what she's been saying, I think is really going to help us bring together our coalition around this issue, working to achieve a ceasefire, bring the hostages home, and then continue to work to achieve a two-state solution. What I will say, though, is I think a lot of this has to do with the approach as well. I come from the movement world. I come from organizing. I've been tear gas, maced. I've been arrested. I went to jail in the district I now represent for nonviolent protest. So I'm never going to be one to tell people to not protest if that's what they feel like they want to do. But oftentimes, if we don't bring people in to have a conversation, it leaves a void. And oftentimes the most extreme voices can fill that void. I remember during the Black Lives Matter uprising, I was one of the lead organizers in Orlando, and something I always told the other organizers was, we have a huge responsibility here to make sure we're careful in what we say, the things we chant, how we do it, because there's thousands of young people who've never done anything in politics before coming to these rallies that will repeat the things we say and look to us to understand how they can be in solidarity with Black Americans during that fight. And a similar thing is happening now too. So I think it's important for our party to really embrace, have these conversations with people and not push them away.
You know, Vice President Harris has changed some of her positions on issues like abortion, healthcare, fracking, since she started running for president. She's largely been given a pass on that by members of the Democratic Party. But how long do you think that is going to last? I mean, are these divisions going to reemerge at some point on some of these issues, which are very important, I think, to young people and particularly people on the left within the party?
I think by and large, our coalition is focused on making sure Donald Trump is not elected and that we elect the vice president. And once we get there, we'll do what our party's always done. We're a big tent party. We're a party where we're going to have a lot of disagreements on a lot of different issues. And those conversations are happening now, and they'll happen when she's elected as president as well. But as you hear on stage, we have people are speaking from all across the ideological spectrum on the left, and as Democrats, and there's even, I think, Republicans slated to speak too during this. And I think it's showing that we believe, number one, that Kamala Harris is the person to really continue the president's agenda and build up on our own agenda to bring us forward, solve this housing crisis, end gun violence, focus on defeating the climate crisis, but also bring our country together to reject Donald Trump for a second time, which he represents the rise of right-wing Christian nationalism, white supremacy, and neo-fascism, something that's on full display in the state of Florida right now. You know, part of the reason I'm so amped up about this campaign and traveling the country to get people to vote for the VP is because Project 2025, like, we're experiencing that in the state of Florida right now. 40% of the books that were banned last year were in my state. Middle schoolers will read in their textbooks, in print, that Black people that were enslaved received personal benefit from it. My district attorney, who got over 60% of the vote, was taken out of office because of political differences from Ron DeSantis and replaced with a political appointee, someone that he likes and he trusts. That's what's going on in my state. I don't want it to go on in the whole country.
You mentioned the housing as an issue that's of interest to you. Yesterday, Senator Bernie Sanders said on this stage that Congress has been negligent in not recognizing the housing crisis. Do you agree with that? And can you talk a little bit about your objectives in that area, what you want to see?
I do agree with that. I think both parties have not provided, in the past, a good platform on housing. If I were to tell you, ask you what's the Democratic platform on gun violence or climate, we could rattle off a list of initiatives and things. Housing, not so much. But now that's changing. You know, Kamala Harris, one of the first policy platforms she put forward is on housing. I think this is one of the most important issues, especially for young people. During my campaign, when the rent hike moratorium was lifted, my rent went up by a lot in just a month. I was priced out of my apartment. I was houseless for 2 months. I ran out of all my money trying to figure out where to live. And during that moment, I was like, well, at least if I win, I won't have to deal with this anymore. Well, then I get elected. I find out I need a new apartment in DC because I'm going to live up there half the year. And I get denied to every apartment I applied to because my credit was so bad because I was living off my credit cards and Ubering while I was running for office. So I didn't choose the housing issue. It kind of chose me. It's one of the reasons why it's one of the things I've been focused on. I have a bill called the End Junk Fees for Renters Act, which is really completely based off of my experiences as a renter and the way that our power in the marketplace has just gone down year after year after year. What this does is end junk fees, things that legally your landlord has to provide for you anyway, that we're getting nickel and dimed for. Trash fee, lawn fee, this fee, that fee. In my district, we found a few apartment complexes that charge tenants $40 to $60 every time they call, text, or email the landlord. That's illegal in the state of Florida. We have almost no tenant protections. The other thing my bill does is eliminate credit scores as the end-all be-all of determining whether or not you should be able to rent or not. You know, studies show, number one, credit scores are not a good indication on if someone's going to pay their rent. And number two, when a working or working poor person falls on hard times, the top thing, or the last thing that they cut from is their rent. It's the last thing they will cut from. The first thing they'll cut from, food and medicine.
The sorts of things that you're talking about, that Vice President Harris has been talking about in this area, require congressional action, right? If Democrats don't win both chambers this fall, do you think it's still going to be possible to get some kind of deal done working with Republicans?
Hopefully, and to be clear, something I've been hearing from the vice president that I love, that I really haven't heard much before, is she's being honest with the American people. You know, when she's talking about these platforms, she's saying, give me a Democratic House and Senate, and this is what we can do. She's also, speaking about the future, been talking about what she can do without it, you know, using the departments that she'll be directing. And so I think that's really important. I think part of the reason we have so much voter apathy in this country, 50% of this country doesn't vote, is because they've been lied to generation after generation by politicians who have told them, vote for me and this will happen tomorrow, when that's not how this system works. So I understand why there's so much skepticism in this, and at the same time, as many Republican leaders are defunding our public education and civics are being taught less and less in our schools, this is what happens. And so we have a responsibility as electeds to not BS our constituents. That's something I did in my campaign. I never made campaign promises on vote for me and this will happen. I promised what I would fight for. I promised things I would do. I never promised outcomes because I know how this position works. And I want my constituents to see me not on top of them, but part of this fight, just in a different place on their behalf.
We also had Senator Chuck Schumer here yesterday with my colleague Rachel Bade, who asked him twice whether he would support term limits for Supreme Court justices. I know the Supreme Court is a subject that's of great interest to you. Senator Schumer dodged that question both times. Now, you co-sponsored articles of impeachment for Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. You supported term limits for the justices. You said that the court is completely corrupt and that it's important that the American people see that we, the Democratic Party, I presume, don't think this is okay. What does it say to you that Senator Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, one of the most powerful people in your party, will not publicly back this effort?
Well, you know, I think that all Democrats should be behind this. Like I said, and not just Democrats, everybody should be behind this. Here's the problem. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter your ideology. When the American public starts to lose faith in our critical institutions, that's part of what shows a democracy that's taking many steps back. As you might know, the United States was put on a list a couple years ago of democracies in the world that are sliding. This is part of it. People are losing faith in our institutions because of corruption. And what's the thing that polls the highest in a bipartisan way? Rooting out corruption. And so I think it's really important that we do that at the Supreme Court. And that's why I'm for these list of reforms and open to other reforms too. We need to have this conversation now. And I'd like to see all Democrats in the Senate, in the House, get behind, yes, term limits, but I'll tell you what needs to happen even before term limits if I were to do an order of priorities. I mean, I like it all at the same time, but what we really need is ethics reform. That's the first thing that needs to happen here. That's going to stop the bleeding that's happening on this court so we can hold these folks accountable when they are not acting in the best interests of the American people. They are legislating when that's not what that court is supposed to do. If they want to do that, they should resign and run for Congress or run for the House of Representatives or the Senate. And we have to do our job in terms of oversight and making sure that we maintain the integrity of that institution. I think term limits are a part of that, but I think the ethics reform is the biggest one. And look, there are a lot of really interesting ideas and creativity around this. And so we need to keep engaging on it as a party. But I hope it'll happen in a bipartisan way more and more over the years.
Well, I mean, the party has been engaged with this issue now for a couple of years. You know, President Biden himself traveled a bit of a journey on this subject. He was opposed to reform, and then after this most recent term, he came out for reform. The vice president immediately came out for reform. I've spoken to your colleagues in Congress, Sheldon Whitehouse in the Senate, Representative Hank Johnson in the House, who are spearheading these efforts. But I have noticed a conspicuous gap among the Democratic Party leadership. And I guess I wonder what is left to discuss within the party on this subject. What is it that these folks don't know that you know?
I'm not sure if it's a matter of what, do they not know that?
Or whatever their assessment is, how it differs from yours.
I'd have to talk with them and have the conversations. I haven't had those conversations. I do know our Democratic leadership understands that some of the first things we need to do when we win the Senate, have the House, and the presidency is look at how we're going to strengthen our democracy. It's part of the reason why hopefully, future Speaker Jeffries is going to put voting rights bills on the floor. Those will be the first things that we handle. I see that Supreme Court reform bills as a part of that as well. And so we have to have those conversations. I think that we've had enough talking. We understand the reporting has been out there. We see the corruption. We see the fact that some of these Supreme Court justices are not acting on behalf of the American people or even in accordance with the Constitution, but trying to help a specific political party and specific political candidates.
I want to turn to back to Vice President Harris and her candidacy. She's not just a woman and she's not just a person of color, she's a woman of color, right?
Yeah.
And that introduces unique dynamics. You also have a multicultural background.
Yeah.
How do you think Harris's biography has influenced her campaign, her specific set of attributes?
Yeah, I appreciate this question because, there's something said last night, I think Rep. AOC said it, that, she's for the middle class because she's from the middle class. And I think this is in a similar way. We talk about intersectionality and all these different things, but for someone like Kamala Harris, this is her life, right? Having, being mixed race, understanding different cultures. And this is what our country is. I mean, me too, right? I was adopted. My mom is Cuban. My dad's from Kansas. My dad's a musician. My mom's a teacher. My biological mother is Lebanese and Puerto Rican. My biological father is Haitian. So I had a lot of identity crisis growing up. But I represent one of the most diverse districts in the country. And so when I think about the issues, I'm thinking about them through that multicultural lens. How does this impact different cultures? How does it impact different people? And it's the same thing with the vice president. And I think that enhances her ability to legislate and advocate in the right way. The point of Congress is supposed to be representative of the American people. Why do we want it to be representative of the American people? Because as we're solving the problems of today and the problems of the future that we don't even know about yet, we want the most experiences represented so we all come along for that journey. And when you have individuals who carry multiple experiences in the same person, that's an asset. And so that's exciting for me. And it's unfortunate that Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and a lot of the Republican Party have, really denigrated themselves in this conversation to baseless racist attacks on the vice president.
Can you talk a little bit about those attacks and how do you think the media has handled this subject?
Well, I'm going to be very blunt. When I first started hearing Republicans call her, a DEI hire, and then it went from that to something else. It went from a DEI hire to calling her a DEI. They would call her a DEI. To me, the way that you're saying that, the context, that you're saying it, you could replace DEI with racial slurs, any racial slur. You're saying anything but the N-word. That's the way I feel about it. When you have someone like Donald Trump going and talking about her mixed race identity, saying she was Indian and then she turned black, not only does this show his ignorance, but it shows his inherent racism. Because I believe that he believes that there was nothing wrong with what he said. And so I think that shows inherent flaws in who he is.
How do you think the media is done in this area?
Yeah.
Intersectionality, has sort of become a loaded word in some parts of the political sort of culture, particularly on the right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like the media has done a particularly great job in this area.
I agree. I mean, number one, when I went on the news and talked about the fact that I saw a lot of these charges being racist, I got hammered online. And as I was looking online and hearing folks talk and puns and stuff, I didn't really hear people making that connection in a good way. But there were a lot of reporters and journalists that were talking about how some of these comments made on mixed race Americans were offensive to people of many different racial backgrounds. And I think that was really important too. I did a few interviews on that. But I think we need to have more of this conversation. It shouldn't be, and I agree, I don't even really use the word intersectionality out in public right now, because for me, this is just about who we are, like as humans, as people, who we are, who our parents are, where we come from, what we love, what we eat, music we listen to, and how we behave. And that's just human. That's the word I like to describe with it. And so I don't like to make it harder to understand than it is. People should be validated for who they are, where they come from. That's true freedom. That's what it means to be free in this country. That's not what Donald Trump stands for.
Well, I could ask you a lot more questions. This has been we're short on time. It's been a very interesting and insightful conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.